Welcome to our third installment of our lightning course for SAM 101. Today we're going to be talking about software entitlement, the asset part of software, understanding what we own. So what is software entitlement? Software entitlement refers to the rights and permissions that go along with the software, with the individual organization's ability to use a specific software product. And the application is typically governed by terms and conditions that are found within a software license agreement. And software entitlements have many different attributes, often many more than are shown on a PO or an invoice. And this is what makes it difficult, because you have to know those to be able to understand what you actually own. A couple of the attributes that come down to making a software entitlement is what kind of license is it? Is it a subscription? Is it a perpetual use license? Is it maintenance? Is it based on the number of users that are using the software? Is it based on the number of users that are using it at one time? Is it based on the number of processors? All of these different metrics identify how a software is measured and how it can be used.
There's hundreds of metrics that exist in the world of software.
And the software publisher can change how the software license is often measured, sometimes on a year-to-year basis. Also, there's use rights, and this kind of governs how the software can be used. Can it be used on a production server? Can it only be used on a non-production server? Can you use it? Is it tied to a certain computer or a certain office or a certain location? All of these aspects identify exactly how that asset can be used. And if you don't use it in that way, you could be breaking a contractual agreement. So with that, we'll go to how are these software entitlements measured?
Yeah, so when we think about software entitlement, it's kind of where we start oftentimes, right? Because the software entitlement is that input into effective software asset management and governance. So software licensing agreements, as Chris mentioned, have vital components that dictate how we can use the publisher's software, right? So let's look at just a few of them. There's a whole lot more than just this, right? But we want to touch on a couple. So we may be contractually restricted or obligated to only use software in a specific location or geography, right? We can only use it in a certain country? Is it something where we can only use domestic? The geographic scope is oftentimes something that you may see. Also, just how much of it did we purchase, right? The quantity itself, right? Did we purchase one or hundreds or thousands?
Well, then how, if it is by processor,
right.
How is a processor defined?
Exactly.
It might be different per each software
Exactly.
publisher.
So looking at the license metrics, Chris mentioned a few of those, right? Is it per device? Is it per user? Is it per named user, where only John Doe can use it, or can anybody use it, right? Chris also mentioned another one. Do we only have a certain number of people that can use it at one given time? Right? Is it per core? Is it per processor? There's so many different metrics, and it's important that we understand what those metrics are so that we can accurately count our software entitlements that we own and count how much we're using. It's also something that we should keep in mind when we think about contractual agreements is the audit rights that are associated. So sometimes software publishers they extract revenue from their customers by doing or conducting software audits. There may be situations in place where a customer or organization the publisher does not have the right to audit. But regardless of whether they can or cannot, it's important that we understand what the scope of those audit rights are. We also want to understand things such as downgrade rights. So if we purchase the newest version of something, can we as an organization deploy an older version? Also, we care about what versions or what editions of the software we are entitled to use, right? Publishers are making constant updates and constant changes to their software, releasing new versions and new editions, and we need to know at what version or what edition we are entitled to use. We also may care about environment use rights. So this could be something where our development environment or our disaster recovery or test environment may differ than our production environment or perhaps pre-production environment. So it's important that we, as a company, are aware of all of the different pieces that go into software entitlement. Now, when we start saying, well, it's important that we gather that software entitlement, right? We have to know what we use. Oftentimes, organizations will think that we're just going to run a report from our procurement system and call it a day, right? We're just going to get all that raw purchasing transaction data. When in reality, that's not the case. So instead of that, organizations may say, well, yeah, that's fine. We're going to pull all of our raw transaction data from our procurement systems And then all we'll do is simply supplement that from getting reports from the software publishers or perhaps the software resellers that we buy software from. And then that equals what we're entitled to use. And Chris, it's not like that.
It's not. It gets more complicated.
So, us as an organization, right? We may have gone through various merger and acquisition activity over the years. And it's important that we understand that each separate entity that was also acquired by our organization, they also probably purchased software in the past, and we need to be aware of and account for that software to understand that if we as a parent company are entitled to use it or not.
And they might have bought it in a different metric or different agreement
Absolutely.
or a different way.
Mm-hmm. So then you say, well, okay, we need to gather that data from the software publisher. But guess what? There's a whole lot of software publishers, right? There's thousands of them. So we need to understand where it is, what publisher's software we have. And then we also need to understand if we purchase that exact same software that the publisher sells, perhaps we bought it directly, we also need to understand if we work through one of our resellers to purchase that software. So again, we're complicating things a little bit here. Lastly, we may have individual business units that purchase their own software. Now, that could be approved or unapproved through the normal channels of things, but business units, we may have localized or decentralized purchasing, or it may be entirely centralized, but regardless, we need to know if that's occurred. And then to complicate things, we now have cloud, right? In the cloud marketplaces, we can also purchase software or subscriptions. And then, not only cloud, but we also have SaaS subscriptions, right? The Salesforces of the world and others, where perhaps we purchase directly or indirectly. But regardless, it's important that we know of that purchasing so that we can account for it when we look at our SAM program and know where we should prioritize our time. So really, the point of all this was to say that gathering software entitlement data, it is a complicated process. It can be done. But it's important that we look at all the components, that we look at merger and acquisition activity. We look at purchases that have been made directly from the publisher, that we look at purchases that have been made through resellers, through cloud marketplaces, we need to look at purchases that have been done at a local level or a decentralized level, as well as a centralized. So anyway, that's all that we have for this one. It's important that we understand what software entitlement is and that we account for it in our software asset management program. That's all we have for today with this third installment of our SAM 101 Lightning course. If you have any additional questions about this topic or others, feel free to reach out to us at englepoint.com.